trainings in archaeology. It's not 100% perfect, but it's pretty perfect and reliable. In any case, we test the place first before we excavate it. So we dig small holes on the margins to see if we are going to find archaeological material. And if we find archaeological material, then we determine that this is a site and then organize a proper excavation. And so we decided to look for noncamber, and we found it. Once we found it, we tested it, it produced material, and thus we decided to make a proper excavation. Now, there is a big difference between archaeology and oral traditions. If I gave this example before, and some of you, you'll be hearing it for the second time or third time maybe, depending on how often you have listened to me. But there are economists and sociologists in the audience. When they do research, they tend to write questionnaires and send them to respondents to respond to the questionnaires. They write a set of questions. Now, the respondent, the one filling the form, is free to tell you the truth or to tell you what they think or not. I've given this example before. Let's suppose you are one of those people who come from a denomination that says, thou shalt not drink beer, thou shalt not eat pork, thou shalt not smoke, thou shalt do this, okay? But I mean, when you have listened to people like me and you are bored, like some of you will be when you get away this evening, you will just want to relax with give a guy a grin. And yet you know your denomination does not allow you to do that, okay? But you reckon, God, one bottle? No, I'm coming to Paris. Nothing is going to happen, okay? All right, you have lied. An archaeologist will not do that. An archaeologist will say, okay, from now for the next 2 months, I will be collecting your garbage. You have no idea how much of yourself you throw in the garbage can. And so if I really wanted to know you, I don't have to ask you anything. Just give me your garbage. That's all. I will spread that garbage, study it, and I will write you a story and you'll be amazed. That's what an archaeologist does. You see, the archaeological material we find are things that people threw away because they thought they were useless. And they were indeed useless to them, because you don't throw away something that's useful. These things were indeed useless to them, and so they threw them away. That is what I was looking at for at noncamber. So that is the excavation in progress. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, now, that slide shows some of the finds at noncamber. But before I go and discuss those finds, one of the interesting things about archaeology is actually carbon-14 dating. We do carbon-14 dating, and I just want to read to you what I've said about carbon-14 dating. It's hard to do this orally, and that's why I'm going to read. I explained it in this section as I simplified it as much as I could because I had in mind the nature of my audience. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. And so, the chemistry involved in carbon-14 dating is too complex for the purpose of this book. However, to put it in simple terms, carbon exists as two stable isotopes, carbon-12 and carbon-13, and a third one, carbon-14. This one, the third one, is radioactive. Radiocarbon is a byproduct of cosmic ray bombardment in the upper atmosphere, where it is incorporated into carbon dioxide, with winds spreading it throughout the atmosphere. It is spread by winds throughout the atmosphere. 98% of the C14 enters the ocean, while the rest, which is 2%, it is taken by plants through photosynthesis. From plants, it enters herbivorous animals, and carnivores acquire it by eating the herbivores. Humans by eating both plants and herbivores. So that's how we acquire the carbon-14 into our bodies. The amount of carbon-14 in an organism remains at an equilibrium with the atmosphere so long as the organism is alive. Once it dies, it no longer takes in carbon 14. Instead, the carbon 14 in it begins to decay or taking off, and therefore it decreases. It has been calculated that after about 5,730 years, only half of the original amount will be left in the body. It will take the same number of years for half of the remaining half to decay. This number of years is referred to by scholars as the half-life of carbon 14. Originally, it had been estimated that after 45,000 years, not much carbon 14 would be left in the organism, meaning that the method could not provide dates for objects that were older than that age. Subsequently, however, carbon 14 enrichment techniques were developed, and they helped extend by up to 4 half-lives the maximum age limit for which the carbon 14 dating method could be used. Only organic remains, therefore, can be used in the carbon 14 dating method. When we excavate, we go for charcoal first. That's what we collect for carbon 14 dating. Because I could send a bone, I could send seeds, but then to get the dates, they would have to destroy the seeds. While charcoal is already in its destroyed format. So we send charcoal first, and then we get the carbon 14 dates. To put it in the simplest term, that is carbon 14 dating. Okay, now let me go back to the finds. Now, that slide, when we are excavating, we have to come to a floor. The floor is where the people actually lived. How do we know we have a floor? We knew we had a floor at Noncamber because we found that material. That is not clear, but this is fire-baked earth that was used to plaster a house. This slide has an imprint of a paw that was used to construct the house. That is what told us that this was a part of a house. And we reached the floor where we found, here is the floor again. Okay. You won't be able to see that one again. But on this floor, we have grinding stones, we have bones, and other objects that told us that this is actually the level where the people lived. Now, one of the things we look for in archaeological excavations is pottery. When a pot breaks, it can survive in the ground for thousands of years. In Malawi, we have plotted pottery. The earliest date we have for pottery in Malawi is 320 AD. And we know what pottery existed between 320 and 800 to 900 AD. It's called Nkope pottery. We know the pottery that existed after that, and up to the pottery that the Chewa introduced in Malawi is called Mauzu pottery. So it's for me or for Alfred there, he can pick any kind of pot and know exactly where to place it on the Malawi pottery sequence. At Noncamber, it was clear we were dealing with Mauzu pottery. So we knew this pottery is dated between 1200. It started to be made about 1,200, about 1,200 years ago, 1,200 AD. And it was being made until about 200 or 300 years ago. So we were able to associate that pottery with the Chewa at Noncamber. We also found this object at Noncamber. Okay, that object is called a spindle hole. Now I'm going to show you a series of objects we found at Noncamber, which enabled me to document that Noncamber was not an ordinary site, but it was the capital of the Chewa. When the Chewa finally migrated to Noncamber and settled there, they decided to make it their headquarters. This was a town. It was not an ordinary small place. Some of the material we found at Noncamber are similar to the material that were found at Great Zimbabwe in Zimbabwe. Before releasing this book, I decided to make sure that we go to Zimbabwe and I visited Great Zimbabwe. I was being embarrassed in my classes because I would talk about Great Zimbabwe. It's so close here, I had never been there. So on our 40th wedding anniversary, I took my wife and our 2 grandchildren and our son and drove to Great Zimbabwe. just so we could see Great Zimbabwe, so that when I talk about Great Zimbabwe, I should be saying I have been there. Okay. This, and so some of the material we found at Noncamber are quite similar to those we found at that we found at Great Zimbabwe. This one thing is called a spindle whorl, W-H-O-R-L. Those of you who are from Chewa or Salima and Kotakota, you know they use this to spin cotton to turn it into thread. Or in some places like in Australia and North America, not North America, I think Scotland, where they raise these sheep that they can produce wool. In the old days, they would use something like this. There are different types. This one is made of clay, but they can be made of stone. They can be made of bone, and they are used to spin cotton or wool. This told us that the people at Noncamber used to make cloth. Okay, that's interesting evidence. Then there's this object that I found there. Uh-oh. Oh no. Did I push it too much? I want to show this one.
Oh, this one. Yeah, we can show that.
Okay. Okay, now that is a smoking pipe. We found, how many smoking pipes did I find at Noncamber? 79 smoking pipes. Now, what are they doing there? 79 smoking pipe. And you all know that tobacco is an American crop. Because it's an American crop, you know it was never here until the Portuguese arrived. And the Portuguese did not penetrate this part of the area until the early 16th century. So your guess is as good as mine as to what they were smoking. Because it could not have been tobacco. There is now the technology. The technology now exists. It will probably tell us what kind of cannabis this was. But they were, oh, you didn't hear that. You didn't hear that. But we found 79 of these at Noncamber. Okay. Okay, the next slide. I think you better do the changing there. No, the one before that. Okay, we also found literally large amounts of iron. What this tells you is that they were manufacturing iron implements, not buying it. How do we know they were manufacturing iron implements? We know because we also found a great amount of iron slag. These are the byproducts of iron smelting, which means they were smelting it on site. We found different kinds, hoes, axes, and all kinds of things. A majority of them were so corroded they were unidentifiable, but they were abundant. Next slide. Now, that's copper ingots. Malawi does not have copper in commercially exploitable quantities. So what is copper doing at Noncamber? We also found large amounts of material made of copper. These particular ones were not found at Noncamber, though. These were found by someone excavating or digging a tree stump in Dedza. And he found 7 of these hidden under the tree stump. Somebody actually had been hoarding this or hiding them there. Something must have happened to him and never came back for them, only for the Department of Antiquities to find them. And so, but these have been found all over Central Africa in different sites, in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, and then in Malawi. It tells you that that's how they stored copper, because you can go and dissolve that and make various kinds of copper objects. You could also exchange this material for money. Okay, they had great value. Next slide. Okay, those are necklaces, copper necklaces. We also found them at Noncamber. We believe they were not made there. We believe they were imported, except maybe the last 2, they could have been fashioned there. But the first 3, they are not any different from what many of you may be wearing around your neck. Okay, but these go back to over 400 to 500 years ago at Mankamba. Okay, next slide, please. That is a locally made necklace. We believe it was large, and it was wound with a lot of copper wire. We found large amounts of copper wire at Mankamba, large amounts. It was wound, they took 2 or 3 copper rods and wound around it copper wire so that it was really large and shiny, probably worn by an important person. Next slide. Those are fishing hooks. Now, Mankamba is not very far from the lake. That's why Louise called it Lake Musura, because Mankamba is not very far from the lake. And so these people were fishing a lot. Besides, the site of Mankamba is in between 2 rivers, and those contained fish in the past. They made the fishing hooks out of copper rods, thin copper rods, or thick copper wires. Next slide, please. Okay, I put that slide there to remind me to talk about faunal remains or bones. We found over 38,000 bone fragments at Mankamba. When I started writing about this research, many people were interested, and I did get funding from the British Institute in East Africa and from the South African Embassy to go to South Africa to hire a South African zooarchaeologist. A zooarchaeologist is an archaeologist who specializes in identifying animal remains. And so there were 2 zooarchaeologists at the Pretoria Museum in South Africa who identified the bones. I sent them the entire lot, over 38,000. There were actually 38,663 bones. They identified over 11,000 of them over a period of 2 years. This was not only identifying that this is a femur, or this is a humerus, or this is a radius, or this is a tibia. It was also identifying the name of the animal, whether it was female or male, whether it was aged, just an adult, an infant, or neonatal. These are experts. So they were able to identify 11,000. I have a list in the book of the animals that they identified. Next slide, please. Okay, those are bangles. These bangles are made of ivory. Let me point out that of the over 38,000 bones I found, over 4,000 were elephant bones, elephant remains. Why? Because these people thrived. Their major trade item was elephant ivory. Elephants were so abundant in Malawi before we destroyed them. Those of you who have read the books by the book written by Livingstone, when he got to Chewa, he saw elephants that formed a line 2 miles long. And this was only in the 1850s. We don't see that today. These people were expert elephant hunters, and they thrived on trading elephant ivory. The Chewa had a tradition. When a hunter killed an elephant, automatically one ivory belonged to Kalonga. He could keep the other one. So Kalonga had a right to 50% of all ivory obtained in his land. No wonder he was rich, because the Portuguese bought these items. Two years ago, I went to talk at the University of Lisbon in Portugal, and somebody there told me that when the Portuguese in the 16th century bought this ivory, they bought this ivory in Asia, but they bought this ivory in Africa. I just want to give you this example to show you how important ivory was. When they bought the ivory either in Mozambique or Angola or over southern Africa, they would first go to Portugal for the king to take it, and then send it back to Asia. I said that doesn't make sense. Why can't the king trust his governor in Mozambique to tell him how much he has? Oh no, the king would not have that. It had to go back. We argued about this, but then I'm not Portuguese, so I trusted them. That's what happened, okay? So, that's why a large proportion of the finds were ivory. Next slide, please. In fact, one that's another piece of ivory. In fact, one of my colleagues, when he read this part of the story, he said, "Are you sure you're not talking about someone who actually was hoarding, was hiding these ivory bangles?" I said, "No, they were not in one place. They were scattered throughout the excavation, okay? And they were so well decorated, they were for the international trade." Next slide, please. Okay, now, that is the last slide, I believe. That slide shows you Chinese porcelain. Now, today, you find this type of Chinese porcelain in museums only. You don't have, you'd probably find that at Windsor, perhaps there because they have a long history. Maybe they keep it in a place, and when an important leader comes, they would bring it out and serve them. But this is original Chinese porcelain. Now, when I recovered this material, mind you, they have not, the only other place this material have been recovered is in Zimbabwe. And in Zimbabwe, they found them at Portuguese trading centers of the 16th century. And the theory, Professor Chirikure in Zimbabwe thinks that these were not even used by the Chewa or by the Shona in Zimbabwe to save food, because they don't think any sane local person would buy this material. Why? Because they are not very functional. African people eat from deep plates, not flat plates. Okay? Because of the nature of the food. And so they would they would buy plates that are functional, that are deep. And so, but the Portuguese, those that brought this place here, the Chinese and the Portuguese, thought that Africans would like this place. When they didn't like them, Chirikure thinks they were given to leaders as exotic material just for demonstration. It may be possible with noncamber, because, as I said, in Zimbabwe they have been found at Portuguese trading centers and houses of rulers. That's one of the reasons that made me believe I'm handling the noncamber, the capital of the Chewa. Now, I was helped by Professor Bronson from the Chicago Field Museum in the United States. He is an expert on Chinese technology. eating. Should the younger person who happens to clear the place as required by Chewa custom institution, or the older person who was also the Kalonga was ruler of the state or head of the political sphere, Undi was the Nkoswe or ruler of the family, and therefore a real force to reckon with. The second reason for his departure had to do with a succession dispute. Some sources claim that the term Undi was today, and therefore Undi and others believed that as bearer of this title, he would succeed his brother, the deceased Kalonga. Some councillors, however, in favor of a nephew because Undi already had a title. This angered him, and in the end, he left. And so, my own speculation is that at this time, people who supported him. Chauffeurs, citing the same Jesuit, said that Musura was an employee of one Portuguese settler and was an energetic person and a good hunter, qualities that helped him build up a loyal following. In the end, he was able to unite several similar chiefdoms or states into a large kingdom. This background would have been difficult to believe had the Portuguese not dealt directly with Musura after he escaped or left his employer. He did nothing like of those things, but that's what these early researchers said. He was simply appointed by Wundi. And great authority. For instance, they recorded in 1608 that they sought his help in their fight against the rivals of Mwenemotapa Gas Rusere in Zimbabwe. Musura, even as early as 1608, he had the capacity to offer the Portuguese 4,000 soldiers. In 1616, now I'm coming back to Gaspar Bocaro, I said I would be mentioning later on. In 1616, the Portuguese traveler Gaspar Bocaro visited Musura for 2 weeks at his headquarters called Marau. After that's the Bocaro's rendering of the word Malawi. After examining some written sources, Rangere, another researcher, who believed that Musura was either Capuit or Lundu, and Hamilton, concluded that Malawi was probably located along the Wankrumas River in Mwanza district. Calling the place Malawi was apparently in keeping with the Chewa traditions. Okay, now, Musura had the capacity to do this. In 1622, with the help of the Portuguese, Musura defeated Lundu in Chikwawa, Nsanje. Remember, Lundu and Capuit are the other people who broke away from Kalonga. From that time on, the Portuguese referred to Lundu as the number 2 person in the Maravi Empire, and that the number 1 person was Kalonga Musura. Musura ruled from 2 places, from Mankamba and from a place near the Wankrumas River. This has been documented by the Portuguese, and because the Portuguese provide these dates, we know exactly when the Maravi Empire was formed, and we also know when it ended. But this was an empire that started from the Dwangwa River in the north, all the way and reached the Zambezi Valley. Kalonga controlled this area by appointing chiefs to be in different areas who paid him homage and royal tribute. Because we found these materials at Mankamba, and some of these materials are similar to those found in Zimbabwe, there was one simple explanation: Mankamba was the capital of the Chewa. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. If there are any questions, I will welcome them. Thank you. Before you ask the questions, Alfred, can you come forward, please? This is Alfred Topeka. No, because I want to go back home and my wife is here.
That's all right. Feel free, please.
Yes, my wife is here. Can you come forward too? And my daughter, I'm staying at her home on this place. I don't want to be evicted. And my son-in-law. This is Erse, my wife. As I told you, in 2018, we celebrated 40 years of marriage. So yes, I did say my son-in-law too. Where's Kebas? And this is our firstborn, our daughter Atweni. Until last year, she was the Director General of the Financial Intelligence Unit here. But that's a political position, so I don't want to go into that. but she is our firstborn. Our secondborn is Dr. Prof Juwayeyi, teaches at the Polytechnic, and our youngest is with us, works in Washington, D.C. Kebas, where are you? Oh, okay, my son-in-law is not here, but okay, you may go and sit down. Thank you.
Before I speak, can I take the honor to announce that it's my husband's birthday?
Oh,
Happy birthday.
yes.
Happy birthday
Yes.
to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Yusuf. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. One last person, because he left the Department of Antiquities earlier, Matthias Zalinga, where are you? Sorry, but you should not have left the Antiquities. That's why this gets forgotten. But Matthias Zalinga also worked with us as at the Noncamber site before he left. And so I just want also to appreciate his assistance. Thank you very much, Matthias. Okay.
Thanks very much for a wonderful. You're an amazing storyteller, by the way. Thank you so much for that. I would love to just ask you one question, and then after that, we'll just open up to the audience to see if there are any other questions that people would want to ask. Maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then after that, people buy the book, hopefully, and you can sign it for them. I would like to know what are your thoughts around Kamuzbanda's Chewalization of Malawi? I know that's a social history question, but I know next to nothing about archaeology, so the best I can do is ask you a history question.
Thank you. In this country, I've already told you that the Chewa form over 1/3 of the population. Before 1966, I think, Chichewa language, the language that we call Chichewa today, was called Chinyanja. It is still called Chinyanja in Zambia. In fact, the book Mbiri ya Chewa that Ntara wrote, it was required reading. In retrospect, we did it wrongly because it was taught in a Chichewa literature class and not in a history class. And the idea, now in retrospect, I think I understand why, because the then president of the country was planning to make Chinyanja a national language and change the name to Chichewa. And so that's what became Chichewa. Now you are asking me, this was a political decision. It was not that's why in Zambia it's still called Chinyanja. Okay? This was a political decision. And politicians make decisions based on what whims they have. And the country has gone along calling Chichewa, Chinyanja Chichewa, and it has become a national language, and people respect that. It is not part of archaeology, but as I said, Chichewa is a Western Bantu language, and that status has been maintained. What we have not done here, what they have done in South Africa, in having several national languages. I think the reason why no strong opposition was made on that one is because the next most populous ethnic groups are in the order of size, the Lomwe, who are the second largest ethnic group, and the Yao, who are the third largest ethnic group. But they came so recently. In fact, the Lomwe started coming at the turn of the 19th century. They haven't been here that long, although they are now the second largest group. The Yao started to come here in the 1820s, well after the Chewa had well established themselves. I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe that if the Tumbuka in the north were as large as the Lomwe, perhaps we would have two national languages, because their history is deeper than that of the Lomwe and the Yao. They have a much longer history, although it's probably shorter than that of the Chewa. We probably would have two national languages, but we don't, simply because numerically there are not as many as the Yao or the Lomwe. Yes.
Can I open the floor to any questions in the audience, or questions or comments?
Thank you, that was an amazing talk. Absolutely wonderful. I'd just like to know why we don't have a museum in Lilongwe that we can see all your wonderful finds. I'm fourth generation foreigner here in Malawi, and I didn't know anything about Mankomba. Is the site open for viewing as a kind of museum? And why don't we have a museum in our capital city?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I tried when I was Commissioner for Culture and failed. And I know Dr. Ogomani Chindevu, when she was Commissioner for Culture, she must have tried and failed. I have raised this issue even at international meetings, sometimes in areas that I thought if I say this, the government might feel a little embarrassed and do something about it. It simply has not worked. The conclusion is these things are not a priority to the government. I raised funds, I helped raise funds from, for the Kalonga Museum. GTZ helped us with that. At that time, 300,000 euros was a lot of money, and it helped do the Kalonga Museum. There was a push to have that in Lilongwe, but the consensus of opinion was that no, the dinosaurs have been found in Kalonga, and Kalonga is growing. Let's put it in Kalonga. So it was put in Kalonga. But for Lilongwe, unfortunately, I have no answer. The only answer is the government, it is not a priority. If we didn't raise funds internationally, maybe you wouldn't be going to Kalonga to look at the dinosaurs. And I think one of the reasons we succeeded is a dinosaur anywhere in the world is a crowd puller. People want to see, kids want to see dinosaurs. I'm sorry, that's the only answer I have. Inadequate.
Maybe I can say something on that.
Yes, Elizabeth.
The plans are there. The site was also identified somewhere in area 10, close to MCA. Actually, the plans were approved some time back, but what has been lacking is the funding. So maybe you can assist us.
So, yes. So she came after me, so she has the latest information. So that's the latest information.
And your site, is it possible to visit your excavation site?
Well, yeah, but there's nothing there to see, because once we excavate, we cover it. But I had a question in Blantyre. Perhaps the Chewa Heritage Association, and we have a member of the Heritage Association here, perhaps they can work together with the Department of Museums to erect a museum or a memorial at Mankamba. I think that would be the greatest tribute to Karonga and Chewa history in general. So perhaps that would be that. The closest we have to this is those of you who have been to Moore. Father Bosche has done a good job of sustaining this history. Okay, so we could have a memorial at Mankamba. So perhaps I'm throwing this. We have a member or members of the Chewa heritage here, and we have the director Mazbuko. Where? Okay, the current director of the museum. You can come forward too and remove your mask. I'll remove mine one momentarily so that people can see you. He's here. Maybe we can. Maybe something can be done in terms of erecting a monument towards the Chewa history. Thank you, Dr. Masboko.
Thank you, sir. Do you have another questions or comment?
Yeah, sure. Here.
Okay.
So there is a question from Facebook.
Yes.
Someone is asking if the artifacts that you've unearthed at Mankamba are also corroborated by oral evidence.
Okay. Yes, some are. One type of artifact that's not in the slides I showed you were beads, but that's a different story. I discovered over 5,000 beads from Asia, all of them dating to about 400 to 500 years ago. But for instance, the elephant remains is corroborated by the fact that we know that Karonga required hunters to give him 50% of the ivory. That's sufficient corroboration. We got that from oral traditions, not from archaeology. So when you hear that, you go to Mankamba and find all these elephant remains, then you say, okay, the traditions must be correct. This is what they are talking about.
Just a small remark from me. I happen to be an associate of the Juwayeyi from way back. Clement Pangapanga is the name.
Oh, Clement. You see these masks?
Yes, once again, I happen to be the current director of industry. And we just to underscore the fact that the cultural tourism issue is key. I think Ministry of Tourism has interest. And I would emphasize that colleagues in culture, museums, antiquities, and what have you, as well as the Secretary for Civic Education, should ensure that this thing is escalated into a multi-sectoral project. Without a grounding in our history, we also realize that we may not be able to take off as a country, because there is connectivity between emphasizing the fact that the country was manufacturing in 1500. And it's not manufacturing today.
That's a pity.
Yeah, that's a pity, really. We should be able to say we can take off because we did it before. So just to say that, colleagues, we are available, and let's collaborate on this, and we should escalate this to the highest possible levels. Thank you.
And the culture lab will be the place to do that, by the way. Any other questions or comments from the audience before we wrap it up? I'll take two more questions, and then there's some wine at the back and books for sale. Please buy the books. He's here to sign. He sign for you. Those who buy the books, please just write your names down somewhere on a small piece of paper so that we'll save time through that. Yes.
It may be a silly question, but where exactly on Malawi map is the Nankamba site?
Okay, if you take what is called the Lakeshore Road, do you know Ntakataka? Yeah, if you're going south, the last river before Ntakataka on the left, that's where Mankamba was. Yes. On the left, when you're going south from Salima. Yes. In fact, one of the things that led me to the site is because when they constructed that road, it cut through the western margins of the site. And one things that archaeologists do in order to locate sites, you look at river banks and road embankments. Okay, I've already looked at what is called the exchange here. There is nothing there, just the road. just the road. But at Mankamba, I saw this. I was with Alfred. We saw this and we said, no, all these beads let's investigate this place. We even excavated that embankment. We dug into it and recovered material. So that's where Noncamber is.
Thank you very much. My name is Montgomery Geresomo, Secretary General for Chewa Heritage Foundation. Just want to appreciate the work that you've done, and you've taken us back into time to see what our ancestors were doing actually. And as the Chewa Heritage Foundation, we have 3 pillars to protect, to preserve, and also to promote Chewa culture. And we have plans actually to establish eco-tourism centers where our the kachis or the shrines are located all over the country. We want to map them and then start tourism. So Ministry of Trade, I think we'll be working with them, and also Ministry of Tourism, and also Ministry of Culture and Civic Education. I was interested to know, did you find anything related to dances apart from Gure Wankulu, other dances of the Chewa people, or some artifacts that showed maybe sort of celebrations that were taking place that time? Thank you.
The answer is no direct not artifacts that would direct us to dances, because to do that we would have to find maybe masks, because they now wear masks when they dance. We didn't find any of those, but we also do know that in some dances they wear a lot of beads, and so we did find beads, if that can tell you anything about the dances. Otherwise, the answer is, with reference to dances, no.
Okay, I'll take one last question, Elaine, and then we'll close.
Thank you. Just a quick comment and a question. Thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating. I work for the Lilongwe Wildlife Trust, and we're doing a big project at the moment to create some new exhibitions and signage that will cover Malawi's natural history, but we would love to bring in some of the cultural and social history elements as well. So this is a kind of invitation for anybody who would like to collaborate with us. We would love to explore some partnerships and get some expertise from partners. But I was interested in whether you found any examples of any aspects of the Chewa culture that was about protecting the environment. And obviously you gave the example of ivory trading, but were there any artifacts that you found that suggested that these people were using the environment in a really positive way for medicine or anything like that?
No, I found that elsewhere when I've excavated it, and that is my next, perhaps my 3rd book after this one, because I've already started writing the other one. But no, not at Noncamber. But this, I think you should know, that indigenous societies have built-in mechanisms for environmental protection. When you would be surprised, when people go hunting, they just don't chase the first animal they see. The males know, we suffer the most, right? They go for the males first. Why? Because they want future productivity. Save the females, hunt the males. They burn the vegetation in a controlled manner. People whose livelihood depends on the environment, they make sure to protect it. And so we do not have artifacts that would directly make me interpret them as environmental protection. But I know that culturally, indigenous communities do that. And that's the answer to that. Thank you.
One last one.
We've not, you know what, just because we just hang around, drink some wine, so we just chat through that. We're out of time. Please buy the book. The book is up. The books are up there. It's 25,000 kwacha per copy. Buy it, get it signed. But also the bookshop is open, so if you can just walk along, get to the other end, There's a bookshop. We're open Mondays until Saturdays. So please support us, and thanks for coming. And yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. Oh, yes, I know you.
Looking forward to Prof Juwayeyi and events like this, right here in New York.
Oh, okay.